Do you mind if we start off with the Gamma Cast?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so we're doing Captive Night, Season 3, Episode 11.
Yep.
Our Christmas episode. A few weeks after our Thanksgiving episode, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And, yes. Okay, ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
You are about to listen to the Totally Super Awesome 80s Reboot Overdrive podcast.
This podcast is our fan tribute to the Incredible Hulk TV show. Be advised it has been exposed to radiation and we caution to listen at your own risk. You have now entered Gamma Cast.
And welcome to the Gamma Cast. I'm your host, Charlie the Professor Esser, and with me as always is my skinny rich friend.
It's Mozz.
Hey Mozz, welcome back to our very special Christmas episode of The Incredible Hulk. Captive Night first aired December 21st, 1979, just before Christmas. David Bishop is working overtime at Slater's department store the night two brothers break in. When the safe proves harder to crack than expected, David pretends to be after the money as well. Directed by Frank Orsatti, written by Sam Egan, of course developed by Kenneth Johnson. As always, starring Bill Bixby, Jack Coven, and Lou Ferrigno. And we've got some pretty interesting folks on our card here as well. Most interestingly, we have playing playing Mr. Edwards, Dennis Halloran. He had previously been on The Incredible Hulk back in Alice in Disco Land, if you remember that episode, as Art Philbin, who I believe was the disco club's owner. If I recall correctly, I don't think he was the dancer.
He definitely had a very disco club owner face.
Yes, he definitely is the guy who plays the bad guys who run the place. Oh, he was Captain Farrell in Beyond Westworld. Of course, as always, these guys have great plays throughout it. Now, another person who was in this that I was very interested in, our actor who played Gary, who is still, up until 2008, still an active actor. He was playing Dr. Charles Kroger in Monk up to 2008. What I thought was interesting with him, so let's get down to his 80s profile, was, of course, sorry, he was in Captain America Death Too Soon. So another crossover with our Marvel Cinematic Television Universe here. Back in 1979, he played a character called Kramer. And then, for all of our 80s aficionados, we had our actress Anne Lockhart, who plays Karen Mitchell, who back on the classic Battlestar Galactica played Lieutenant Sheba for several episodes, as well as many, many other shows. Mark Leonard, who we get in the very final scenes as the owner, Mr. Slater. He was on the Planet of the Apes series. He was on Hawaii Five-0. He was on The Incredible Hulk, of course. He played Sarek in Star Trek's The Search for Spock, as well as I believe he played Sarek in The Undiscovered Country, and Sarek on all the times Sarek showed up on Star Trek The Next Generation, and I believe he was actually Sarek back in the 1960s when we first started having Sarek show up on Star Trek. He also played a Romulan commander. Fun fact. So this is our classic actor-heavy episode, and it's something of a bottle episode taking place in Slater's department store, which, of course, is, you young kids may not even... Well, actually, it's funny. It's funny when you think about it, because, of course, kids nowadays, they go to what's called a big box store.
Right.
Which is essentially a department store. That was replaced in the 80s by the mall and has come back once again as under the guise of Walmart or Target or any other number of places. We open up finding out that that the guy in charge of this store is of course Dennis played by Dennis Halloran, Mr. Edwards, who is a horrible sexual harasser. Like, just a really horrible human being, the level of sexual harassment that he pulls off. In fact, we have our guard, Parley Bear, who plays Raymond the guard, make comment on it as they're going in that, since it's
she doesn't want to be alone with him.
Yeah, well, he says, since it's you're working late, I'm not so worried about it. With Mr. Edwards, I worry about her working late.
Right.
Karen Mitchell is, of course, our assistant manager, which is as high as women were allowed to go in those days, at least up until that point. We get our conflict from Jim and Gary. Jim is a recently sprung ex-con who robs stuff. Gary is his little brother who always looked up to him, who now would like to rob stuff as well.
Right, and it seems like he's been waiting for him to get out ever since he went in.
Yeah. Well, and it's very interesting in that, because I'm not sure exactly what Jim's view on this whole thing is about career criminality, because he doesn't. He like at first seems like he's kind of discouraging his brother from it, but then not too strongly.
Right. It almost seems like he's laying the case for, hey, I told you it was dangerous,
Yes. But to Gary's credit, he had cased this place out for months. He'd gotten all the ins and outs, and he was ready to strike had the store not very recently upgraded all of its security.
Right. Well, that's true. That and, David seems to show up and ruin everybody's plans.
Well, what I think is great about this is had the original plan worked, I don't think David would have been a problem. Because I think, honestly, the whole reason why David gets to be a problem, and really David isn't a problem. David actually tries to help them. So to get to the actual meat of the story, they don't know that David and Anne are working late. Mr. Edwards thinks that David intentionally mismarked stuff so that he'd get the overtime.
Right, but what the funny thing is, the story David tells in the beginning is that he told Mr. David that 50 was the inventory number, not the price, and he didn't want to hear it. And it seems like he's the one that ordered them to mark them that way in the first place.
Well, yes, they're definitely playing Mr. Edwards as completely incompetent.
Right.
And I think for our big denouement, Merry Christmas, let's solve all our problems, that was necessary.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, because really, there's nothing Mr. Edwards does in the bulk of the story to warrant his
position.
His outcome at the end, his firing. Just to give it spoilers, if you haven't seen the episode yet, he gets demoted at the end, and just showing that he has been up until this point a rather incompetent manager, and even though that doesn't his sexual harassment doesn't factor into that, it certainly doesn't help his case either.
No.
So David and Anne are remarking stock, and Jim and Gary go in to make their break, and then the whole thing goes pear-shaped. Because they catch Anne and they catch Raymond, our guard,
Neither of which are supposed to be there.
Neither of which were supposed to be there, and of course Jim keeps on making the reference. Oh, maybe it's where the dogs are, because he's saying,
right.
Because he pretty much figures his brother is a schmuck at this point. And
exactly.
For what it's worth,
he'd hoped.
Yeah.
He'd hoped that, when he got back out that the guy would have improved. He sold him a good story, and he's like, you know what, I just got out. It's kind of dangerous, but this looks like a go. So, and now my favorite thing is when they run into the room and see the giant door.
Oh, yeah.
And he turns around and is almost crying.
Yeah, well, because it wasn't there before,
Yeah.
Which is just classic, It's just a classic amateur problem. Now, of course, in this, and this is what I love about this episode, is you really see David, once he realizes what's going on, he immediately goes to problem-solving mode. He knows right where to go, where to look, to find where the codes are for the safe, and he finds them.
Yeah.
He gets the key to the jewelry cabinet, which he knows he's going to need as his bargaining chip.
Right.
And, and then he goes in and he presents himself as a very believable criminal.
Yeah.
To the point that, had Karen not picked up on the little thing they made a point about telling someone what the color of the sky was, she might have totally bought into it. And to that end, it's a great piece here with David basically desperate, trying to bargain with these guys, and and it's one of these interesting questions. Is I think they kind of maybe made the wrong choice in. Honestly, here's what I'm going to say: if I was Jim, I would have at this point taken the key, cleared out the jewels, and left. Right. Called it a day.
Although, I get the sense that maybe Jim wasn't that smart of a criminal to begin with, because, obviously he's been in prison for a while. Then he decides to go along with this ridiculous scheme.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, his, solution for the problem is, hey, let's wait till morning. My thought would be, hey, you know what, we're not in jail yet. Let's cut our losses. This was a really bad idea, and let's get the hell out of here. But for some reason, I just don't think he's a very smart criminal himself.
Yeah, and the fact that neither one of them wore masks going in. They've both been wearing just a couple of, as we used to call them back then, ski masks. Now they'd call them balaclavas. But we used to call them ski masks back in the day. Had they just gone and wearing ski masks, they would have been fine, because no one had saw their face. They could have said, we're going to lock you in this room and count to 100 and we're going to leave,
Right.
And even then, when they get the money, it's like these little things where, yeah, you're right. I think that maybe Jim was not nearly as good of the criminal as he implied himself to be to his hero-worshipping little brother. And that is why things have gone pear-shaped, because you have basically the dumb leading the ignorant,
the inept.
Exactly, or the inept leading the ignorant. There we go. Because we assume that Jim must have at least pulled one or two of these off in the past. He just,
Right.
Otherwise his brother wouldn't be so admiring of him.
That's true. That's true. What I will say is, though, the acting in this was really, really phenomenal. The relationship between the brothers was played so well, and it felt so real.
Oh, yes. And like I said, and this is one of these episodes where when you pull up the IMDb and then you go to everyone's IMDb page, you see just how great all these actors are, how often they've worked, how much. Even when it's just like, oh yeah, then I did this, and then a week later I got that next TV show, and I got the next TV show, and I just even when they didn't get a recurring character like some of them did, all of them have gotten at least one or two recurring characters in several major shows. They all kept on working because these are some really good actors, and that's one of the things I think I love about when you're watching these shows from the 70s. We always talk about like how this is the golden age of television.
Right.
I'm not 100% certain that it is much more than what you had back in the 70s and 80s. Just because, granted the stories are probably better now, but I think there was just such a great community of working actors that you would see in these TV shows in the late 70s, early 80s that was, kind of strong as an actor's perspective. I think now we're in what is the golden age for writers. I don't think that it was a golden age for writers back in the 70s and 80s. I think that basically, someone came up with a concept, someone said, hey, you guy, write that. And that was basically it.
Together.
But I think for actors it was really a strong place to be. And I think, and for what it's worth, I think maybe even that's sort of the detriment of social media now is that there's so much. There are followings for actors, but when they do something that doesn't resonate with their fan base, it can hurt them, I think, that's something that's hit Hallie Atwell kind of poorly right now, where she had a lot of fans from Peggy Carter, but then she did something that wasn't Peggy Carter, and it didn't do quite as well, and and it was a good show. I mean, it was a very good show. It was her breaking from what her fan base wanted, and so she didn't have that star power, that social star power as a person who had the fan base to bring in. And it is what it is. But moving on to the actual story. So as we said, David, when he realizes what's going on, he goes, he gets the codes, he comes back, and he pretends to be, another guy who was casing this joint, and he's gonna split it with the guys 50-50. He's gonna make a deal with them so they can open up the vault, etc. And again, towards the Jim not being the best guy at this business, his idea is to take David down into the freight elevator, which is out of service.
Right.
Put him in
and you see 30 signs as they're walking up: out of service, danger, don't go ahead.
Absolutely.
Completely oblivious.
Yeah, well, because that's what he's doing. And I guess from his perspective, it's like, well, yeah, of course it's dangerous. That's why I'm trying to kill this guy. In the most roundabout way possible, which is, I guess, kind of the weird aspect of it.
Yeah, it's avoiding as much responsibility for it as possible.
Yeah, while
still doing it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he could have very easily. I mean, now he could have shot all three of these people very quickly. Yeah. He got the code. He had everything he needed. He just had to, shoot three people, steal the money, and go. Or even open the vault, steal steal the money, and then walk away after he turned on the air conditioner, which he eventually does do. But even then, it's like, what would have really hurt you if you just shot three people, wiped the gun clean, and left it there? Is this a gun registered to you? Which maybe that's probably filed all the paperwork at the city hall. It's like, oh man, I knew I should have brought a gun I didn't have registered to me. I knew I shouldn't have used my concealed carry permit gun when I did this crime. Right. But then again, of course, as we always say,
that's finally where David decides to, or doesn't decide to, but he finally hulks out. And it sort of made me think, earlier on when he first figured out things were awry, does he ever have a thought to himself oh, come on, Hulk, where are you at, Does he ever wonder, is this not, like sometimes we do, is this not enough to bring you out, Hulk? I wonder if he has those moments, where are you, where,
Yeah, well, I guess because we have established so strongly his negative view of the Hulk, that it is hard to come up from it from this point of view of, oh yeah, let's just Hulk out. Because honestly, if you really approached it from that let's Hulk out perspective, that's sort of the every time you try to do a redemption story with Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, even you get that same kind of conundrum where you say, well, Hyde has this strength, and maybe if we just embrace it, we can have that, and that's certainly an option here. But I think that what you get with the Incredible Hulk is that you have to have this conflict, which is the original Jekyll-Hyde conflict, which is this idea that Jekyll doesn't want to be Hyde. Jekyll doesn't want to have that transition because he loses control. He is no longer in control. And of course, that the counter argument is that Hyde doesn't want to go back to being Jekyll because then he loses control.
Right.
They don't want to be sharing this existence in this way. And for what it's worth, it is a very real sharing of existence. It's not like when the Hulk comes out, Banner goes to the negative zone and is just, observing but unable to interact. It's he ceases to be, and that is the problem for the Hulk in this, and also the problem for Banner is that they cease to be when the other person is in charge. So the idea of bringing the Hulk out, aside from the fact that the Hulk he can't control it, and the Hulk is by his nature pretty dangerous. When the Hulk comes out, he is going to cause problems.
Right.
For everybody. I don't think David ever thinks I need to bring the Hulk out. Although, obviously, if it was you or me, we absolutely would be hulking out every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But then again, we're not the people that, maybe if we had the kind of discipline that it takes to study to get your multiple doctoral degrees in radiochemistry and radiological chemistry and biology and your MD, maybe you'd have a little more. We'd have a little more self-control. Which
of course, he does Hulk out.
Yes, he does.
And bust through the elevator, and we end up in a little cartoony carnival scene.
Yeah, well, that was fun, and that is like the weirdest. I growing up growing up in this era, I have been to the old big box stores. I've been to Montgomery Ward's and Hudson's, and really even these stores still exist in the form of Sears and J.C. Penney's and Macy's. Right. I've never been into one that had that FAO Schwartz style's toy department. I don't even think FAO Schwartz had an FAO Schwartz style toy department until Big. And that's essentially what he does. He wanders into this place where all the toys are just out and running around. And there's these big things that aren't even toys but are just sort of decorative clowns and whatnot, and and the whole.
Of course, we run into the sexy green mannequin.
Oh yeah. That was an interesting bit. Honestly, I was waiting to see where they were going to go with that. I think they kind of came up with the conceit of it without knowing exactly what they wanted to do with it.
Right.
And so they're like, okay, we got the green mannequin. And he goes to the green mannequin. And, well, what does he do? It's like, it's not like he's going to have sex with it. And it's not like he's going to take it out to dinner.
Would he have in the comics? Like, would there have been a scene where you just see, like, a bunch of noise in the background and Hulk comes out and, like, the mannequin's torn apart and it's just implied that he, like, sort of mangled it?
There was a comics code back in the 1980s that would have prevented such things.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, no. You could certainly write that, and I'm certain there are more than one Tijuana Bibles out there that have such a moment. But no, that would not be a thing. And honestly, I'm not sure if the Hulk necessarily would even just immediately move to sex, that's not the Green Hulk's thing. That's the Gray Hulk. But the Gray Hulk could, the Gray Hulk could speak, and the Gray Hulk actually, would actually have sex with women. So, the Gray Hulk was intelligent enough to know the difference between a mannequin and a woman. The Green Hulk, much less so. The Green Hulk is much more childlike. So,
it's almost like he's being born for the first time and comes out as a newborn every time.
Yeah, well, that is sort of where he's at. He's at this stage where intellectually... So for example, when he sees the green mannequin, I don't even think it's even necessarily sexual for him or even romantic. I think it's just, you look like I look. Are we related?
Yeah.
Do we have some sort of thing together, It's a very interesting question, which they don't really explore very well because eventually the Hulk de-hulks. And then David goes, finds clothing. As luck would have it, he's in a department store, so it's relatively easy. Although, weirdly enough, he doesn't get a new shirt. He just puts on a jacket. So it's just very 1970s. I'm wearing a jacket with no shirt. we're going to go along with it. And that
was definitely for effect. That was for the ladies.
Yeah. And then he goes and confronts the actual two robbers, presents himself as a fellow robber. Well, he had already presented himself as a fellow robber up until that point. And that's when they decide that they have to put them all in the safe, because they opened the safe. They put them in. And again, just to remove all sense of... And, I guess, there is an argument you can make for Jim here, which is that he's too smart by half.
Right.
Which is that everything he does, he's doing with this idea of what is the cop who's coming into this the next day, what is he going to be thinking?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what he would have thought about Banner crushed by the elevator. Except that, a guy was playing around in the elevator, except he still had two other people he had to deal with.
Right.
And I'm sure from his point of view, the idea would have been that, Banner went in and then accidentally locked themselves in, and they'd actually accidentally turned off the AC, the air, and so Banner was the criminal and accidentally killed all three of them. Right. I'm guessing that was the story that he was trying to create there on the fly, and I'm sure it works to some extent.
The other part is, my thought would be, hey, take the money and run. You get 2 states down, they're not going to hear about a small department store robberies 2 states over,
Yeah, well, no, that's obviously the point. But of course, the guy is also like a 3-time loser.
Yeah.
His next strike, he goes away for life.
Right.
And this is when 3 and 4 strikes laws first came into existence. So this is new. Now, of course, in this case, he is actually a pretty strong recidivist criminal. He is actually the exact person that these sort of laws were written for.
Right.
And for what it's worth, the law itself is in no way a deterrent to him. So when you make that idea of he is exactly the criminal that you want to be caught by this, it does not prevent him from committing his crimes, or in accelerating what his crime is from robbery to murder, expressly because he does not want to be caught. So it's very interesting that you would have this presentation that opens up as perhaps an argument in favor of 3 strikes laws, or in this case a 4-strike law, that at its core is actually a counter-argument against it, which is the fact, and this is what I thought was very fascinating about this, all told, is that the criminals are made very human. That these are 2 guys, they're brothers, they've been together for years, and they're just making their way in the world as much as anybody else.
Right.
Now, granted, they cross the line when they decide they're going to rob a store and kill everybody.
Right.
But then again, I don't think Jim necessarily wanted to kill anybody from the start. It's just that now he's in the spot, and now he's got to make these choices.
And that's why he was trying to be so careful to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But there we are. And eventually, you get this little tug, at least, because the older brother is sort of a rotten soul. It doesn't seem like there's any saving him. He's been in there. But the younger brother, she pleads with him, leave the air on. And he's really not a bad guy. He just wanted the money. He didn't want to hurt anybody.
Yeah.
And so, he does leave it on. But as they're leaving, the older brother goes and shuts it off.
Yeah, but of course that's the crux of the criminal life, is nobody and this is I think this was Jim's point in the beginning with it. It's look, you think that these are all easy, and they're not. And if they go south, we may have to make some choices.
Right.
And
when does it not go south? Of course,
Well, especially if you're on a 1970s TV show, man. It's always. They should have watched closely for those opening credits. Say, oh man, we're in a TV show. Oh, we better just do something different. So of course, they're in the safe. The air is off, and
no one can see a thing.
Yes. So of course. And honestly, it's a little weird in that sense, because it's really, this is what triggers the Hulk because so many other things have not. But yeah, okay. So this
Right.
triggers the Hulk. It helps the story. And for what it's worth, I think maybe David is always a little more prone to hulking when no one's watching.
Right.
He's
a shy beast.
He's a shy beast, yes. He's a little Hulk shy. So he hulks out. He of course smashes through the wall and
metal.
Breaks the safe basically.
Yeah.
And goes and he does beat up the criminals.
Well, the younger brother's caught underneath the door, and then he goes and chases Jim, the older one.
Yes, Jim, the older one. Yeah, so basically, that's how the younger brother gets caught. Is he's trapped, and of course, then the older brother basically says, "Sorry, bro, I told you this was no honor among thieves."
Yeah.
And he runs off, and the Hulk gives chase, captures him. I can't remember exactly how he captures him for the cops to pick up, but he does, and then. David?
He's standing there, like, confronting with the Hulk, and then Raymond comes from behind holding the gun to him, and then Hulk runs off, and obviously Jim's in his in the sights of his gun.
Yeah, so there we go. So Raymond basically captures him. Yay, Raymond! Yeah. Ray, our policeman.
He's a good guy.
He is. Well, he's a professional security guard, and he was taken down, but now he stood back up, and he was gonna make you pay for the way you treated him. And of course,
I get the sense he was a former military man.
Entirely possible. I mean, really, when you look at guys in that position, very likely he might have fought in Korea or World War II even. I mean, and you remember there used to be this thing called a draft where when America went to war, numerous Americans actually had to participate in it, whether they wanted to or not. And we don't do that quite so much anymore, and there are very logical reasons why we do it, but at that time in history, there is a counter-sociological argument that if we're going to go to war, maybe it's best that we make poor Raymond go to war with us. Because then maybe Raymond's a little less interested in voting for people who want to go to war all the time.
It's a fair point.
Yeah, fair point. That's the complex sociological argument, because you have to have those when you're dealing with the Hulk. Because this is a show that's deep on so many levels. Let's not forget. Okay. Yes.
Sorry, no, I was just gonna say I'm so surprised going through the series to see how deep it actually is, and a lot more so than shows you see today.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, like I said, when you talk about the golden age of television, I mean, the late 70s, were a time where everyone wanted to be, Archie Bunker. Everyone wanted to be a show that was both commercially successful and intellectually interesting.
Yeah, and it was art.
Yeah, well, it was, and this is what I'll tell you. What we're experiencing now in television is not new. What I'll tell you right now, what we got in television is better CGI. But the fact that there have always been great television shows out there, that there's always been writers who wanted to tell great stories episodically, this is not new. And, maybe now they get a little more free hand in things. Although I often feel that sometimes that freer hand just leads to more, violence and sex, it doesn't necessarily lead to better stories. It just says, well, I guess we can show boobs and someone getting their boobs cut off this episode. Or other parts of their body cut off, or just generally grossly murdered in general.
Right.
Which is fine. I have no objection to that. I watch adult programming all the time. It's quite enjoyable. But, I think that sometimes when we talk about what makes a good show, I don't think it's the lines they cross, it's the stories they tell. And I think that
I think it's the questions they leave you with.
Yeah, well, because what happens is when you cross those lines, it makes you watch the show, and that makes you know that there was a good story behind it. But there are always, but there's very often good stories behind the shows. You just don't always get to see them because you didn't watch them because nobody got their boobs cut off. You know.
Right.
Anyway, and speaking of boobs getting cut off, Mr. Slater comes in our final scene to basically explain to Mr. Edwards that he is being held responsible for what has occurred.
Under his watch.
Under his watch, yeah. Hey, you know what? It all rolls downhill, but you know what? If you're at the top of the hill, it's still stuck on you. And Karen gets elevated to his old position, which means Mr. Edwards, who very much wanted to use his position of power to extort sexual favors from Ms. Mitchell, is now in a position to... I mean, I'm sure he would love to still be sexually harassed by Ms. Mitchell.
Doesn't work so well in the other direction.
No, it does not. It is generally speaking not how it works. And that's our happy ending. You know, all told. Cue Lonely Man's theme and David in a peacoat. Any final thoughts on the episode, Mozz?
No, it was a good one.
It was a good one. It was a very good one. Next episode, we get a great 70s, 80s twist of people who look exactly the same. Oh yeah, it's a fun one next episode. And for what it's worth, this is a recurring trope in comic books themselves at this time, where you would have many people who just, they walk in and, I can't tell the difference between you at all. And what's funny about that is I was listening to someone complaining about Shakespeare today on NPR, and they were explaining how that's so often a trope in Shakespeare, is this idea that, someone alters their appearance ever so slightly and now no one can tell that they're not the same person that they were. Although, it makes you wonder sometimes how much we do pay attention to people and how often that does occur. Okay, Mozz, if anyone would like to reach out to you, talk to you about The Incredible Hulk or any of the other amazing things you do, how can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook at Mozz Manzor or email me at mozzmanzor@gmail.com. That's MOZZMANZOOR.
Excellent, Mozz. And, of course, you can always write to me in that old-fashioned email way at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And, of course, follow me on the Twitters as I live tweet The Incredible Hulk, 7 o'clock on Saturdays, when I can get around to it, as well as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when it's not on hiatus, Legends of Tomorrow when it's not on hiatus, and every so often, whatever show strikes my fancy. You can do that at Charlie Esser, that's CharlieEsser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. Thank you for hulking out with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please, hulk out with us again. Good night.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.